All right, so as we're digitally painting, we're now using our customized brush, and I just like to use that one brush for the rest of the project. I can change the size of it, I can change the opacity of it, but I'm not going to go to another brush. And I want you to be a little wary of the ones that they put into Photoshop. For instance, they have like dry media brushes. All of those are pretty good. But when you get into the special effects brushes, sometimes they are not going to be for the brush tool. Sometimes they'll only be for the eraser. They can get really confusing. So remember, it's not the shape of the brush that matters, it's the settings that you have on the brush. And shape dynamics and texture are the ones that are most basic and most helpful. You can even set your brush up to blend and alternate between a foreground and a background color. You can have it set up as a mixer brush so it takes colors automatically from layers underneath. There's just all kinds of things you can do, but you want to just learn the basics. Because all digital painting is just controlling every pixel in the way you like. Now the hardest thing about the refined painting, because it's pretty forgiving, but the hardest thing is actually just getting everything to be adjusted and colored. Right? And so I think of the base painting kind of like finger paint and the refined paint like crayons or like colored pencil. And so I use a smaller brush at a lower opacity. So it takes a little bit longer to build it, but as you're building, that's what creates the more interesting paint texture, right, at the end of the day. It's like these stray colors, like the purples that are in the yellows, the greens, the blues, all these things that come through. Every once in a while, I might just throw in a random color. So as I'm mixing, those new colors come through, especially complementary colors. So unlike digital coloring, where you are pretty disciplined in the colors you choose, whether they're duotone or whether they're even full spectrum, here you're using kind of full spectrum everywhere all the time. That's pretty standard for digital painting. Then there's another trick I like. We already have the gray background. But once you start covering up a little bit more of it, you saw I brought my reference a little bit closer. It's hard to see the whole picture for the details. So the other little thing I recommend is called the navigation tool. So you go to Window, or not tool, but the navigation window. And you're going to open up the Navigator. And the Navigator looks like a little nautical steering wheel. Will give you the whole image in a little box off to the right-hand corner, because it's kind of assuming you're right-handed. And that helps you see the whole of your painting. It also helps you kind of move around without having to hold down space bar. And you can even zoom in and out with it without ever having to move off of the brush tool. So that's the Navigator. My only problem with it is it can sometimes get in the way of seeing my reference. So I might take it off for now and then return to it once I've got a little bit more than just the head painted. Now, if you remember when we were doing compositing, I said it's kind of worthless to zoom in more than 200% on details because you're not going to be able to see them in the final print. That is definitely true for digital painting, but in general, you want to view digital painting from less than 100% so you can see more of it as you're working, because the hardest thing is to treat everything with the same amount of importance. So what I'm doing right now is I'm putting a highlight color on top of some of the dark shadows. And at this point, I want to establish a darkest dark somewhere. So I just stole the black from the AI, And I'm not painting with 100% black. I'm painting it at only about 60%. But that gives me the full contrast. And I see where it's darkest in my image. So that's going to be underneath the mouth, in the nose. And then I can go with lighter colors and kind of soften those edges. With customized brushes, you can't change the hardness of them, but they're already built in with kind of soft bristles at the edge. So that does a lot of your blending for you and your softening. And right now I'm just painting pretty representationally. I'm just kind of matching the photo. But I could stylize this more. At any time I could warp it and stretch it and make it more of a caricature of it. I think just because it's a Muppet that I grew up with, I want it to be recognizable, and it's already kind of distorted and abstracted enough just by nature of being a puppet. But with digital, I can always mess with it after the fact too. And though I require that everyone has at least one refined paint layer, you can make as many kind of layers on top as you want. Some people like to digitally paint with new layers for every section. So they might do a layer for the left ear, a layer for the right ear, the layer for the eyes, a layer for the nose. So they're all like independently controllable. Just all these kind of layers of paint you can revisit later. To me, that's a little exhausting. But remember that refined paint is different than base paint. So this is what my refined paint looks like now. As it builds up, it can be a pretty satisfying look, right? And then I can always just fade out in the end what the base color is doing. But for now, keep it at 100%. Just keep on top of it. Hit Command S every once in a while. And I'm just going to do a lot of videos now that are all refined painting. So once you've established your darkest darks, your lightest lights, your focal points, which is usually going to be the head of an animal or the eyes of a portrait. My animal doesn't have eyes. Then you've got to force yourself to give that same level of finish and detail to the less interesting parts of it, right? So again, just working with lots of energy, lots of movement. So to get this tongue and the texture on the tongue, and to get all those kind of variations into it. Even those strange complementary colors. And I can go back to my inspiration colors as well, because they can get muddied if you're just blending and blending and blending and doing nothing else. Remember, your brush is pressure sensitive, so you can use it in kind of wider strokes or in tighter strokes. It's all up to you. Now, if I'm doing digital painting, especially because at this stage it takes a lot of time, I often will listen to music. And the music can kind of keep me energized through it. I can't do that in class during the videos. You might not like my music, but also YouTube would flag me for copyright, right? But as you are working on your refined paint stage, you don't really need to listen to me drone on about it. if you want to listen to some music, you can with your own headphones. And that's going to be true of our final project too. You're going to get into the flow of it. And so as long as you have kind of one ear available to safety for the class, or if I need to get your attention or there's a fire or something, then it's fine with me with during the digital painting or with the final project, which we're doing next. You can start to bring in your own music to listen to, just to keep you engaged and energized through your digital imaging. Now, the reason I do this assignment towards the end is because we can use all of our compositing knowledge and we could apply it in finishing this off. And I'll be showing you more of that once I get closer to the end. But also, this is a great technique to finish off any other kind of digital imaging. So this just gives you full control of every pixel. Whoops. So if I wanted to composite a project, like my final project, from lots of online photos or even from my photos, and then I just wanted to add a little bit of texture or color or extra content to those photos and that composite, well, I can do it just by painting over the top with digital painting. All right, and anytime I can turn off my base color and see how much I've done. And there's a lot to do still. But once I get away from the focal point, I don't need to be, I can maybe use a slightly larger brush. I don't need to be so tight in my approach necessarily. Back to this stage, I think I am going to use a bigger brush. Keep it at the same opacity, but just make it a little bit bigger so it covers a little bit more space all at once. So I don't want it to get too fussy. And now I'm mostly just stealing colors from myself. And then once you have an area that's kind of at a finish that you like I'm getting at on the head, then I know what I need to bring to everything else. Now this project's due next class. I'm not going to do anything on it outside of class. So now I just need to get serious about covering it, right? Getting as much covered as I can. And now that I'm finally moving off the head, I can turn on that Navigator tool and kind of see how it's all coming together. So I've got to make the bottom look as refined as the top.